Sharon Zarella's dad came to Florida from Connecticut to pursue his dream of farming in Florida. So in 1947, he moved to Indiantown and leased some land to farm.
My dad was a farmer in Connecticut with his family and 2 other siblings, and he wanted to realize his dream and come to Florida. So at the time, a farmer that he knew and sold irrigation pipes to Dad moved to St. Cloud. At that time, he kept calling Dad and said, "Mike, you need to come to Florida. I really think you would like the challenge." So in 1947, my dad came down and checked out different areas with him and ended up in Indiantown. And he liked the land there, although he did not purchase, he leased. He wanted to give it 1 or 2 years to try it out. And he went ahead and farmed along with 2 or 3 other farmers that were from out of state. And these farmers realized that the investment they had to make and the challenge it took and the elements that they fought here farming in Florida was more than they can handle. So that year they had a freeze, lost everything, and they packed up and went back to wherever they were from. My dad was not a quitter. At that time he said, "What do you say, Lena, let's go for it. Shall we try another year?" And they did, and fortunately he had a good year. So they stayed in Indiantown for about 7 years.
Tommy Lee's dad came to Florida from China and owned a hand laundry business until he decided that he wanted to work in agriculture. Since the 1950s, his dad worked on a farm with one of his 3 brothers on Long Island, New York.
My dad came from China, and he started, when he was young, he started working in owning his own business, like doing hand laundry, and then he got interested in agriculture, worked for some other Asian people in agriculture and started getting interested. As the years progressed, the gentleman that was wanted to sell, so he decided he'd try to buy the farm and continue on in agriculture. He talked it over with the family, and the family decided that maybe they could help. He had 3 other brothers. One brother went into farming with him. 2 other brothers went into construction. They decided that they would do that. If one failed, they could go into the other business. But actually, both businesses were very successful. My dad farmed with one brother whose name is George, and they continued farming in New York and Long Island, because he found out that there was an interest in, a lot of Oriental people, Chinatown, wanted vegetables and stuff. So they farmed there for, I guess in the early 50s.
Tommy Lee's father began to look south toward Florida to farm because of New York's limited growing season in the summer.
When they were farming in New York, they could only farm during the summertime. So they decided they couldn't get supply of vegetables to their customers during the wintertime, and it was real hard, very costly. So they decided to look south into Florida. What I remember was where he started was in Loxahatchee. We farmed there for a couple years, but the problem with Loxahatchee was those couple years that he was there was a lot of rain. It flooded a lot, and it was real difficult. But one year they did very well. Around the late 50s, they decided to look for land. We found a piece in Martin County, and they started Saniac Farms in Hope Sound.
Zarella Cabbage was established after their pepper and cucumber crops were destroyed after a freeze. Then in 1965, they purchased a farm near Bessemer's that had more than 900 acres.
We became Zarella Cabbage after losing our pepper crop and our cucumbers in the wintertime. We got froze out pretty bad. And in 1965, the Ridge was purchased. That's a 900-plus acre farm up there near Bessemer's.
When the Lees moved from Loxahatchee to Hobe Sound, they bought 360 acres.
When we moved from Loxahatchee to Hobe Sound, we bought 360 acres. We farmed, for the first year, we could only farm half of that. So we farmed 130 acres. And in about 3 years or so, we farmed the whole 360 acres.
Farming conditions were quite different between Florida and New York. Long Island had compacted clay soil that reduced water infiltration and drainage, whereas Hobe Sound had sand that needed a lot of fertilizer and plants could easily be washed away during a heavy rain.
The farming conditions in Hobe Sound are quite different from up north where we also farmed. Where we farmed was sand, and you would have to add a lot of fertilizer to help the vegetables grow. It took a lot of fertilizer and to grow anything. The beds were much higher. We would have to form beds to plant the vegetables on. That's due to the rain, too much rain. Especially if the plants are real small, those beds could be washed out.
In 1971, the Zarellas bought 10 acres of land in what is now called Citrus Boulevard in Palm City. Because the property was zoned industrial, they were able to build a cooler that could house 25,000 crates of harvested cabbage and pre-cool it before shipping.
So we got into farming cabbage, red cabbage, Savoy, and cauliflower. And then in '71, they bought the property on what is now called Citrus Boulevard. It's a 10-acre zoned industrial. So my dad decided he wanted to build a cooler that was big enough to hold at least 2 days' harvest of cabbage, or may it be cauliflower, but mostly the cabbage went in there. It was pre-cooled and went out on the trailer trucks after it was pre-cooled overnight. And that cooler held about 25,000 crates.
The Lees family farmed mostly Asian vegetables, such as bok choy, Chinese cabbage, Chinese radish, mustard greens, and a winter melon.
The vegetables we grew on the farm were mostly oriental. What most people are familiar with is maybe the bok choy, Napa, or Chinese cabbage. But there are other varieties like what we call is yu choy. We have a mustard green that we grow, exactly like the mustard green that you would eat, but it's shaped a little different. Characteristics and taste are exactly the same. We also grew radishes, or Chinese radish. Maybe now what you're more familiar with is daikon, Japanese radish. Tastes like a regular radish, maybe a little sweeter. We grew winter melon, or what we call winter melon, but it's also called calabaza, or it's in that family. We make soup out of it.
The Zarellas had a helicopter pad built so that helicopters could come and keep the air moving, as well as prevent the water ditches from freezing throughout the farm.
My dad, at the time that he built this farm, he had a helicopter pad put in and had helicopters coming in during the freezing time and keeping the wind stirred and also keeping water in the ditches prevented him from freezing out the whole farm, and that was a plus.
Cabbage and like radishes and most of what we grew was a little more hardy, could withstand some freezes, Like I said, I think our main problem was water. At one point, too much water, and one point, not enough water. Like I said, insect problems, disease problems were a major factor. Freezes, we did okay in freezes, because like I said, cabbage is more in the crucifer family, so it can take some cold weather.
Dealing with cheaper labor and cheaper prices for produce from Mexico made it very difficult for the Zarellas to sell their produce on the market.
And of course, you know, the challenge too was freezes, and another culprit was Mexico coming in and flooding the market. Us competing with Mexico made it difficult, because realize we had minimum wage to pay and Mexico was cheap labor. They, because of their cheap labor, they would cut the prices and lower the market. So it made it difficult for my dad to sell his produce, realizing what it cost him to grow versus what it cost Mexico.
More people are buying local produce, including the Asian population. And with the availability of better and cheaper produce from worldwide markets, the Lees decided to leave commercial agriculture.
Local produce is, a lot of people like to buy local produce, and even the Asian population likes to buy local produce. That's probably why it has gotten harder in farming, because produce you can get from anywhere in the world right now, much cheaper, much better. So that's how come I kind of got out of commercial agriculture.
Although there is an increase of interest in Asian food today, it is still difficult to determine the stability of the specialty produce market to continue growing it as a livelihood.
The interest in Asian food has increased a little bit, because people are wanting to experiment and try different things again. So it is turning around to where, like for local farmers and stuff like that, you can grow specialty things, and people are interested in trying it and stuff. Trying the local vegetables. So it is switching around a little, but it's still difficult.
The Zarellas packing house sorted vegetables by machine. Workers packed the vegetables by hand after a quality check. The motto was, "Quality above all else."
Well, in our packing house, it was designed with machinery that sorted the vegetables. The trucks came in from the field with large boxes that the produce was put in. They backed up to the back end of the packing house, and the machinery, the tow motors, would pick up the boxes off the truck and dump them on the conveyor belt. The conveyor belt went up, it blew the leaves, and it washed whether it was peppers or cucumbers. And then it came up on a conveyor and out where all the women were standing on one side, sorting out the different grades that you have in peppers, or may it be cucumbers. And on the other side, it was the women, myself, packing the vegetables and doing what my dad called quality. He was noted for his quality, and this was his motto, quality above all else, and dependability.
Although New York was the Lee's predominant market for their vegetables, they also shipped out a tractor-trailer load every other day to other northern markets, such as Philadelphia, Boston, Chicago, and Canada.
New York, which was our main market, but we also went to Philadelphia, Boston. Sometimes we sold some vegetables into Canada too as well. Maybe about 5 years, like I said, we were able to farm 360 acres, but after that we even needed more land, And it just happened to be that there was some land that we were able to lease right next to our property, which added another 360 acres. So we farmed almost, 640 acres at one time. We also even probably double cropped that, probably close to 1,000 acres a year.
The Zarellas sold their produce to Publix and to the government. Each of them would come out to the Zarella farm to inspect the quality of the produce and approve it before it could be shipped.
So we got in with Publix. Publix is a hard one to deal with. I did some of the brokering myself, and they would come out and inspect your produce and put the stamp on it.
Tommy Lee's father always wanted to grow a particular citrus tree called the pomelo. Its fruit is referred to as Chinese grapefruit, and it does closely resemble the common grapefruit. Eventually, Tommy's father did plant about 40 acres of the pomelo citrus tree.
After my dad got a little older, my dad always wanted to plant some citrus trees, and he always there's this one particular fruit called pomelo, which is considered is the original grapefruit, where all grapefruits came from. They say pomelo's from China. I guess so. But it is a nice fruit. So my dad was able to get some graftings from the state, and went around and got graftings, and he planted about 40 acres of pomelos. Pomelos are real nice fruit. It's, like I said, it's a grapefruit. It's not tart. It's extremely seedy, has a thick skin, but it's really sweet compared to the grapefruits that are commercially grown right now.
Today, Tommy Lee manages the pomelo grove and has seen it do exceptionally well over the last several years. He has shipped the fruit to New York and Texas, but under the current citrus screening regulations, he finds it more difficult to sell outside of the local Asian market.
Well, I took over the grove from my dad and sold pomelos locally, and the pomelos I sold actually did real well for 10, 15 years. I shipped them up to New York, some to Texas. A lot of Asian people liked them, so I was able to ship. I had the grove was, the production was really good, and I shipped them to those places, and I grew a little vegetables. Now, because of the citrus screening, it's very difficult, and mostly I just sell to some local Vietnamese and Chinese people or around the area.
Sheriff Baker of Martin County was told by Mr. Zarella that his wife, Mrs. Zarella, was carrying large amounts of cash every week from Indiantown to Stuart. Sheriff Baker advised Mr. Zarella that Mrs. Zarella needed to be deputized and carry a gun for her cash runs.
Well, one day, Sheriff Baker came out to the farm, and they were discussing things, and my dad said, Sheriff, Lena carries at least $25,000 to $30,000 in cash in 1 week, coming back to Indiantown, 25 miles from Stuart. I told her to ride around Stuart and then keep her eyes in the mirror, and then gun that vehicle the 25 miles out to Indiantown. Well, Sheriff Baker said, no, Mike, this isn't good. We've got to bring her in, deputize her, and got to get her a gun and start target practicing. So they went down behind the house and started their target practicing. So I think my dad felt more comfortable knowing that Mother had a gun. And I, myself, after high school, she would call the high school. We went to Stuart High School in Stuart. And she would call and say to the principal, she knew him well, she would say, would you please have Sharon go by the bank? Levon Good has got the payroll already, and have her come home with it, but tell her what she needs to do, meaning I need to ride around and keep my mirror in focus.
Within the next 2 decades, Florida's agricultural lands will change and transition to younger farmers and newer techniques. And although the new future for the world has technologically rapidly altering the old farming methods and skills of the past, Martin County's warm thermal belt climate and mineral soils will continue to offer a natural agricultural advantage. But the intimacy and dedication of the old family farm will always be an essential piece to Martin County's history.